And this is a prime example of the overstep and the weaponization of Joe Biden's Department of Justice. Just so heartbroken that they couldn't get anything to stick on Donald Trump. And the reason for that is because there was never anything there in the first place. They were going like hell to try to put him away for 470 plus years, to try to bankrupt him. And in this case, they were trying to create an insurrection type narrative with this felon, Donald Trump, so that he would be ineligible to run for the presidency. Fani Willis took herself out of the running when she got this case handed to her on a platter because she couldn't close her legs.
A Georgia prosecutor officially dropped the historic racketeering case against President Trump and others for attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. I want to go right to CNN's Kara Scannell. What are you learning, Kara?
Good morning, Pam. Yeah, this new filing in from the prosecutor who had taken the place to look into the Fulton County investigation of Donald Trump and others has filed a motion with the court saying that they are not going to move forward with the case. They're dropping the charges. What he filed what's known as a nolle pros, and that means that in theory, because if the statute of limitations hasn't run out, a case could be refiled. But he attached to his filing about a 20-page statement explaining his rationales for why he did not think that they should move forward with this case. You'll remember this was the case that began with Donald Trump making a call to the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, urging him to find the votes. And then District Attorney Fani Willis brought this historic investigation and filed those racketeering charges against Donald Trump and dozens of others.
This certainly was historic, right? This was a huge overstep in what was a witch hunt from Joe Biden's Department of Justice. We all know this, and when you see CNN, they just are completely heartbroken today because this is the last of the witch hunt trials or cases that they were trying to go on with Joe Biden. Keep in mind that the timing of this case also was as Trump was building his cadence with his rallies as he was getting ready for the election, and they needed a storyline and a tagline and this convicted felon line that they were trying to go on. That's why they were getting all of those cases filed up in New York. And as you recall, the New York legislature changed their laws just for a month or two so that they could try to jam that one Donald Trump case in. And then they dropped back from this window with the statutes of limitations being null and void after that. So this was all an intentional move. You can see the sad face by everybody at CNN, but the facts are that this was made up. This was absolutely made up, and this was made up so that they could have this moniker of a felon on Donald Trump. And remember, this is where they forced him to go to Atlanta to get his mugshot, that famous mugshot. This was all theater, and this is a prime example of the overstep and the weaponization of Joe Biden's Department of Justice. And we all know that Fani Willis was just a willing and useful idiot in this whole charade as well. She has her own problems, as we all know, with the Department of Justice right now. So just as we're going through the rest of this story, just look at the sullen, somber mood that CNN has. They're just so heartbroken that they couldn't get anything to stick on Donald Trump. And the reason for that is because there was never anything there in the first place.
Interfering with the 2020 election. She was then disqualified from the case because of an undisclosed romantic relationship with another prosecutor. And that is how this case now fell into the hands earlier this month of a prosecutor who was assigned the job of trying to find someone to take on this case. He said that he couldn't because there were too many conflicts, and he took it on himself. Now we're seeing the results of.
Now, what she's not telling you is that the person that was assigned to this case, as she said properly, his job was to go find and assign somebody. It wasn't because of conflicts of interest. It was because nobody wanted to take on the case. You don't just get assigned it without also having say in what you're being assigned. Nobody else wanted it, so the assigner had to take on this case, and he saw that there was nothing there. And you'll hear again that they're just so heartbroken that this had to go away. It's going away because there was nothing there, ever.
that, and that is that he is saying that they are not going to move forward with this case. And he summarized it in part by saying that he made this decision by examining the case file, examining what the jury had been presented, and also considerations of the law. He says that, contesting an election is not unlawful, but, exactly. And that is part of the reasons for why he decided not to move forward with the charges.
Just listen to that statement. Right? The lawyer that was assigned said there was nothing there. And she's sitting here saying, well, that's the reason why they dropped the case. No, that's actually the reason why it should have never been developed or filed in the first place, because it was all made up. And it was made up for a reason so that the Democrats could have that moniker on Donald Trump, that he's a felon. They were going like hell to try to put him away for 470 plus years, to try to bankrupt him. And in this case, they were trying to create an insurrection type narrative with this felon, Donald Trump, so that he would be ineligible to run for the presidency. And incidentally, before we skip over it, the other 78 people that were named in the suit, right? Sydney, what's her name, right? The lawyer, and some of the others, there were a number of Donald Trump personnel and C-suite that they were trying to sweep up into this case. All of it's gone. All of it's tossed.
This point. But, again, this is a nolle pros filing, meaning that they're dropping the case right now. In theory, it could be revived if the statute of limitations doesn't run out. But, of course, Donald Trump is still in office for another 3 years. Pam, this is the last of the criminal prosecutions that have been hanging over Donald Trump as he entered the White House. The only conviction that he faced out of the 4 indictments was the one in New York for the hush money payments, and that one he is appealing. Pam?
All right, Kara Scannell, thanks so much. I want to bring in former federal prosecutor and CNN senior legal analyst, Ellie. How significant is this?
Well, Pam, this means the Georgia case against Donald Trump is over. This means really all the criminal prosecutions against Donald Trump are over. Now, I just had a chance to quickly read some portions of the motion that this prosecutor put in. This prosecutor, Peter Scandalakis, is a 40-year career, non-political, non-partisan prosecutor. He lays out his credentials in the motion, and there's really 2 reasons that he says he's dropping the case. The first one is just a practical reason. He says there's no realistic constitutional way we're going to be able to try the sitting president of the United States, nor is there any realistic chance that when he gets done being president in early 2029, that we will be able to continue a prosecution. That part is technical and I believe correct. But separately, there is a sharp rebuke in here of the DA who charged this case, of Fani Willis. This prosecutor, Scandalakis, says this case never should have been charged in the state courts here in Georgia. He says it should have been charged, if at all, federally by the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., which it was. Now, to be clear, Pam, this prosecutor, Scandalakis, seems to think that Donald Trump's conduct was certainly serious and worrisome. He spends many pages laying it out, but he does say this was not appropriate for a state-level prosecution in Georgia, never should have been charged in the first place, and now it's over.
But ask yourself again, why would they file this in Georgia? Well, they had the willing accomplice, Fani. She was ready to go. She was queued up, anxious to make this impression, to have this in her resume. And this truly, at this point, as Ellie says, this is the last of the last. They have nothing else on Donald Trump. And again, he's appealing that case that was outrageous up in New York, where they were trying to get him on the overvaluation of his real estate. And then that whole thing with the crazy lady accusing him of something that he never did. This vindicates Donald Trump, and this pounds the deep state that was trying to get anybody but Trump on the Republican ticket. That's it. So why in Georgia? It was obvious. Fani Willis was their person. She was dumb enough to try to put her name on this thing, and it went nowhere. Nowhere. So Donald Trump is vindicated, and again, you can see CNN is just having a terrible Friday with this breaking news.
I want to bring in our Kristen Holmes. She is live at the White House for us, I believe. Or no, she's not. She's in Florida. That would make sense because that's where the president is, in Palm Beach. Kristen, this was once seen as a grave threat to Donald Trump and his political future. And it's a really significant development.
It is, and when you go back and look at what the legal strategy was around Donald Trump, what his lawyers were trying to do, they wanted this result. I mean, you just heard Ellie talking about this idea that the practicality of charging a sitting president is part of why they threw this out. President Trump's team knew that this would take on a whole new meaning, that all of these lawsuits would take on a whole new meaning.
See what she just did, right? The previous guy said that her point here, which she is saying is the biggest point, was actually the smallest point, right? That you can't charge a sitting president. The reality is whatever. But what she's missing here is what Ellie said is the real point and the real highlight from the report that the DA put out this afternoon when he dropped the case. And that is that there was no case. There was nothing there as far as precedent to be able to go on, and there was no laws broken. So when you look at what Kristen Holmes is trying to say here, which is, oh, you know, they threw it out because it's just too hard to charge a president. That's not the case. The guy before that was actually honest enough to say that the reality is there's nothing there. This shouldn't have been filed in Georgia. Fani Willis was dumb enough to take it on, and that's the reality. And now we have a pity party going on at CNN.
If he was in fact elected to be president again, and they were banking on that. So what you saw in the strategy from his lawyers was pushing this, delaying this, drawing this process out as long as they could to get through the election in November. And the result, what they had hoped for, is exactly what happened here. The idea that it would be unprecedented and likely untenable to charge a sitting U.S. president. So when you talk about...
Again, she's missing the point. Fani Willis took herself out of the running when she got this case handed to her on a platter because she couldn't close her legs. And she had an affair with one of her employees, right? With the assistant that she hired. You remember that whole fandoogle that we had? So the truth of the matter is that the moron that took the case, Fani, had an affair, took herself out of the running because obviously ethical reasons there, and then it was assigned to a 40-year nonpartisan prosecutor that said there's nothing there. So this lady, Kristen Holmes, is completely wrong when it comes to the facts of why this case was dropped.
What their strategy was at the time, we reported extensively on this. You're actually seeing it play out now, years later, after they were putting in this effort to try and drag this out as long as possible. Now, this, of course, was considered a grave threat. You could tell just by how angry...
Again, listen to these words. CNN is proving why their ratings are in the toilet and why nobody trusts mainstream media. Because the darkness and the graveness of this case was all manufactured. Everybody knew that they were going after, like literally, there was a time period where every other week they were coming up with a new case and another case and a new case and another case against Donald Trump. And the gravitas and the graveness of this case, Christian, is baloney. There was nothing there. You guys made this up because you were trying to create a narrative that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. That's it. You made it up. You got caught. You weaponized the DOJ. You know it. Everybody else knows it. But you're not willing to admit it. Still, at this point, Kristen, get with the rest of America. We're tired of it. We've had enough of the manipulation and the lies from the media, especially CNN.
President Trump was around this. He mentioned it several times on the campaign trail and for years leading up to that campaign, talking about how this call was a perfect call, that there were lawyers sitting in on this call and that everybody agreed. Obviously, not everybody agreed. That was the basis for bringing this case, was this President Trump at the time asking for the government in Georgia, or the officials in Georgia, to find more votes for him. But it is interesting to see how this strategy ended up playing out. And of course, we have not heard from President Trump yet. He is currently on the golf course. I assume we'll have him weigh in. His team will weigh in. This is something that they expected would likely happen, but they've been watching closely. But, you know, with so many of these legal trials and tribulations that we saw President Trump dealing with in the year up to the election, this is a similar path that we've seen from most of them, which is just this kind of falling off. You've seen some of these cases ending, and now you have this prosecutor essentially ending this case against Trump.
They just can't believe this at CNN, that they couldn't get anything to stick on Donald Trump. I mean, just look at her face, right? This is just the way things have been going with all of these cases. They just go on forever. And the lawyers for Donald Trump, of course, they want him to win, so they're just delaying things. No, the reality of the matter is that nothing was there, nothing ever was there, and the real and the proper judgment came through today. So I'm sorry, Kristen, you're having such a bad day. For the rest of America, we're actually relieved to see that for once, right, that we can get just a little bit, just an ounce of trust that proper justice will be delivered, and in this case, it absolutely was. Sorry, Kristen.
And this one was seen as the more serious one in Trump's circle because it was a state case, right, Kristen, and therefore wouldn't be subjected to a pardon.
That's right. And that was something that they had focused intensely on. Now, the lawyers did believe that they had some wiggle room in this case just because of the RICO charges themselves, that it's very hard to actually charge a RICO case. And given the evidence that the lawyers had seen around Trump, there was some speculation that they might be able to work in this case and get Trump cleared at some point. However, that doesn't change the fact that it was incredibly significant, and they did believe that the prosecutor, Fani Willis, was going to throw everything she possibly could at this case and try and make it stick. Plus, President Trump doesn't have a lot.
Fani Willis certainly did. She threw her fat ass at this case and ended up having an affair and getting herself taken off the docket. That's what happened. So, again, this is where we are. This is yet another great way to close the week going into the holiday with Donald Trump being vindicated against the deep state and the smears coming in from mainstream media. So sorry, Kristen, for the bad news going into the holiday. Again, this is +1 for Donald Trump and -1 for the Department of Justice, or at least Biden's weaponized Department of Justice and the deep state that wanted everything. Put everything on the line to be able to get a conviction and an insurrection and a convict label on Donald Trump, so that in the event, right, this was one of the pressure valves that they were using as backup, that in the event that Donald Trump actually did win, they were going to use this as an insurrection clause to get onto Donald Trump so that he couldn't actually be president. Because from the constitutional sense, if you've been charged with insurrection, right, interfering with elections, etc., and remember, this was known. We had recordings from the Senate that this is exactly the case, that they were trying to get that insurrection clause onto Donald Trump to prevent him in the backup scenario where if he won, he wouldn't be able to take on the White House or move in. That's the reality. So what do you think? Are you thrilled to hear that Donald Trump yet again has been vindicated from the deep state? What do you think of CNN's coverage? Do you think it's been honest, not only today, but since the beginning? Or do you agree with me that CNN has been manipulating the news, manipulating this case, trying to get the darkness and the gravitas of this case up to a level of 10, so that all the grandmas that don't know anything better are not going to vote for Donald Trump and think that he's an insurrectionist? That's where we are today, folks. So good news for Donald Trump going into the Thanksgiving break. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to America First Alerts. We'd love to have you along for the ride. And if you got something out of this video, please give it a like and let us know in the comments what you think.